Hey everyone, it's Justin Knipper from Fight Game Media. I'm here after Bloodsport 5 with my co-host from the High Tension Show on the Fight Game Media Podcast Network on Patreon, JD Oliva. What's going on? Let's get the elephant out of the room.
Yeah, I got a big old shiner. I was in my basement yesterday doing a kettlebell power cleans for a workout, and I must have got fatigued toward the end of the workout. And I came up with the power clean and the bell. The bell's supposed to swing. You're supposed to catch it in the back side of your hand or your forearm. And I did it. I must have been fatigued, and I bent over, and it just popped me right in the face. And then I got really angry because I hit myself in the face with a kettlebell. So the mixture of pain and embarrassment was quite a number. So.
Well, I feel like I'd just get knocked out, so I wouldn't even have the chance to be angry. So I guess I try to look on the bright side, I guess.
I'm an idiot. That's the bright side to look
No, I
on.
can see how that would happen.
Giant meathead. So yeah,
when you get into it, you get into the momentum, the motion of it.
Yeah, and I went back to coaching last night for the first time in like a year. So I'm seeing people like, hey, what's with the hair? Hey, what's with the face? And I'm like, well, here you go. So that was a fun evening for me. Let me tell you.
There you go. Well, everyone, if you're not familiar with myself or JD, we host a High Tension podcast about Japanese pro wrestling on the Patreon, and JD's actually a wrestling coach, high school wrestling coach. So he's probably one of the best people I could talk to about Bloodsport because he has the know-how, he has the knowledge. So, okay, let's jump right into it. Bloodsport 5 was tonight. John Moxley versus Davey Boy Smith Jr. in the main event. Tell me what you thought. This was your first time. Was it your first? Oh, you watched
I've watched the last 3 Bloodsport shows.
All right.
So the main event I think is the best version of Bloodsport we've seen yet, at least that I've seen on the previous three shows. This was everything I want in a pro wrestling match. Like I had fun watching this show. I thought it was better than last week's show, but by the time we got to the main event, I just loved it. I loved everything about it. It was so exciting and fun, and it was for me, a guy with a big amateur background. It hit me in that perfect sweet spot of real wrestling and pro wrestling together. It's my world right now. I'm still kind of on a buzzing off of how much I enjoyed the event, which surprised me. I knew I was going to enjoy it, but I didn't think I was going to enjoy it as much as I did.
Yeah, for me, I liked this week a little better than last week. Not that I'm kind of judging it on a different sort of curve because I like all of it in general. Mm-hmm. And when I say if I don't like, I'm being picky, I'm being nitpicky because that's kind of what we're supposed to do if we have microphones in our hand. So, but this week was really exciting from the top to bottom. There weren't any bad matches. It was all exciting. It flew by. How did you feel about about the length? It's about 90 minutes, 100 minutes.
It's really like these shows are just like perfectly like drawn out. Like it doesn't drag at any point. Like the matches aren't long. Like I feel like it's a problem in a lot of pro wrestling today is we've somehow figured that longer equals better. But the opposite, I think the opposite is true. Like you don't have to go long to be great. Like I'm not sure how long that main event was, but I mean like it didn't feel like it wore on its welcome. And I think most of these matches were like 7-8 minutes, maybe.
If that, probably less.
Yeah.
Some were pretty. I think the longest match was Rocky Romero versus Simon Grimm.
Yeah.
But I think it was only maybe not more than 10 minutes.
And that's pretty realistic. Like if you're, if you got a combat sport background, like going for an hour in an actual competition, it's not real. Like you don't do that. Like there's nothing realistic about it. So I mean, like this show, I think really hits that perfect spot of like worked believability. Like they're clearly out there working, but I feel like the suspension of disbelief is really stretched a lot. It's not. I don't think it's stretched at all in these shows. Like I think a lot of it is pretty believable, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it feels like everybody that's involved has some sort of background and grasp on what they're doing and what pro wrestling is, what they feel pro wrestling is or should be. But that doesn't mean that everybody wrestled and kind of came out with the same flavor of the same style. Actually, I mean, comparing like Moxley to Cal Jack, those are 2 totally different guys. Super Beast, like what, we'll get to that in a moment, but each of these guys they were able to bring their own flavor to what they were doing in Bloodsport.
I appreciate that because that's what I keep saying real, but that's what like my sport of wrestling is like. Is not everybody has the same base of skills. Like everyone's body's built different. Everybody's body moves a little bit differently. Like when
Hmm.
I coach our upper weight kids, like I'm like, hey man, don't hit your knee, because most big kids can't do it. They're not athletic enough. So we work on staying in power position. And some guys are really, really good and fast and go low. Some guys are really big and strong. So you want to teach them to go up high. And that's what a real wrestling match is like. It's not everyone hitting these performative beats. Like it's really taking your talents and abilities and figuring out how to make them work for you in a competitive setting. And I think this, like you said, everyone's bringing their own flavor to it. And you could see the guys who had more of the BJJ background. You could see the guys who had the amateur wrestling background. You could see the guys with the MMA background. And then it devolves into straight up pro wrestling, which is where I think you really find that perfect spot. You know, it's a fun show, man.
Let's get right into it. I was impressed right from the get go. We had Scotland's Calder McCall, who I first saw last week against Royce Isaacs, but he had a match and defeated Bad Dude Tito in a really great opener.
Yeah, really good opener.
It, last week's opener was quite different because it was the two MMA centric fellas. So that added a really different vibe to the show compared with this week's. Because I don't know why, but it set the tone in a different way.
No, I agree. And I messaged you after I saw the first match from last week, and I'm like, man, I'm not feeling this, because I felt like that was just two guys that were exhibiting BJJ slash MMA skills, and I didn't feel like it was a match. And I remember I said to you, I'm like, what's the point of watching worked MMA when I can just go watch when I can go watch real MMA? Like I didn't feel it. But I mean, like, and I like 10 minutes ago, I'm like, this is the greatest show ever. Like, this is the best. I think it's when you get guys that are wrestlers or that get it, it's better. And I think this match set the tone for what the show should be and going forward. Like, it was exciting, it was fun. Bad Dude Tito is literally a bad dude.
Yeah.
Like, he's awesome.
I thought that was a silly name at first, but when I
Mhm.
saw him wrestle last week and this week, everything about him, his look, the way he wrestles, the way he fights, that I get it. Okay.
Yeah.
He's Bad Dude Tito. Missing a tooth, California dude, I think a Northern California dude. Sort of shoot fighter, sort of a kind of has his own modern deal, modern feel. And him and Calder McCall had a sort of hybrid pro wrestling slash grappling match. It was a lot of back and forth. Calder McCall was trying to lock on this, I think it was triangle or arm lock for a lot of them. That was like the mini story I saw in it. And I remember early on he was doing the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu type of deal where you sit in your open guard, you sit on your butt, and you wait for your opponent to come down and fight you from there, or if the opponent is going to, stand and try to strike or something, I don't know. But that was interesting because that's something that you see in a lot of grappling fights. Is a lot of, especially in Japan, the scene is where people really want to dictate the pace of their match from that open seated position where they can pull all kinds of, De La Hiva, leg grapevining work, kind of I mean, it's a certain style of grappling, and it's cool to see modern trends in this setting. And it worked here and everything. I mean, I don't know what else I could say about the first match other than it was really good, really fast. Did you have anything? Do you remember anything about the first match?
No, I really like exactly what you're talking about. I liked seeing the one guy fighting from open guard and the other one not wanting to close the gap, because that's real. Is you're going to have guys that, like, for me personally, when I was playing around with jiu-jitsu, coming from a wrestling judo background, I hate guard. Like, I'm totally uncomfortable offensive defensive there. It's bad place for me. So I get that. That's great story to tell. Is you got that exact you're talking about, like, hey, come play in my field. And another guy being like, I don't want anything to do with that. You come play in mine. And that's real. That's a real fight mentality. And I love bringing that into pro wrestling because, like, again, I think we've gotten into such like a routine with what a pro wrestling match should be and how a pro wrestling match should start. So I really like the idea of challenging a narrative immediately off the bat. It was a great opener to start with because you're immediately challenging the conventions of pro wrestling from the get-go and
Yeah,
doing
well,
it exciting and being exciting while watching it.
it was exciting and it wasn't insulting or
No.
awkward. It felt, I mean, it feels like these guys, if if it came to it, they can handle themselves in a fight. That's how it was presented. And whatever it is, I don't know exactly, it's pro wrestling, but whatever we want to call it, it's definitely, it's hard hitting stuff. It's cool.
Yeah, very cool. I liked it a lot.
And so next we had Calvin Tankman, who won in the second match over the young Nolan Edwards. So Calvin Tankman, he wrestles with MLW?
Yeah, he's signed with MLW. He kind of got big this summer with GCW. He just kind of popped out of nowhere and became a little bit of an internet sensation. And then Court Bauer scooped him up right away. And he's got kind of an old school body, like something you'd see more in the 80s. Big boy, but not like covering up, like ashamed of like having that kind of a body, just out there, super athletic at the size, and good personality, fun to watch. Like, I like his stuff. I love the dichotomy of this match. It gave me like an old UFC vibe, like old UFC vibe.
Yeah,
because Nolan Edwards, small dude, coming out there to I forget the band he came out to, some 60s hippie music. Like, it was awesome. I'm like, this is such a dichotomy. It's great.
I love that these guys are able to just choose their tunes. We'll come to that in the main event, but the fact that we're listening to real music, like not real music, but like music that's already been made, it's from the outside, that's instead of the company making everything,
there's a realism to it.
Yeah,
it feels real.
It's what people listen to.
Yeah.
So we'll get to that later, the music aspect. But this was a pretty short one. Calvin Tankman, I liked it a lot better than his match with Davey Boy Smith last week.
I agree. I think this worked better.
Why did you think it worked better though? I think I have an idea, but I want to hear what you thought.
Honestly, I think because of both their positions and where they are in the pro wrestling game, I think both guys are a little bit more on the green side, and I think they just meshed a little bit better. Whereas I think Davey Boy had to kind of work down to Tankman a little bit last week, and I didn't think Tankman was quite as comfortable in this Bloodsport style. Whereas this week, I thought it worked a lot better. I think they just complemented each other a little bit more and were able to just kind of work. They had a better story, I think. I think Edwards played into Tankman's strengths. What do you think? What did you pick up from it?
Just compared with last week and this week, Tankman didn't feel or seem tentative like he did. Tentative in a way that like takes you out of the performance or whatever you want to call it, match. Like I felt like he's a big guy, and I'm sure if he really unloaded on palm strikes, he could probably deck somebody.
Oh, God, yeah.
So I felt like he was, I don't know. I remember writing that some of those slaps were a little ginger.
Yeah.
But that was just whatever. It was what it was. But this week I didn't see any of that. He was great.
Yeah.
Nolan Edwards too. Yeah.
Yeah, I think in this style, you got to lay it in a little bit more, especially when you're promoting the more realism thing. I think you got to kind of be a little bit snugger.
Yeah. So like, that's why I don't want to can't blame anybody too much. It should be pointed out, but it's also like everybody's not everybody. Everybody involved seems to be like, they know what they're doing, but they also seem like they're figuring it out as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of learning on the job because we still don't quite know what Bloodsport is. Right. We're really, I'll say it. We're kind of reinventing the wheel a little bit. Like, we're at least redefining what the wheel can be, and I think there's a learning curve with everybody involved in figuring out what can I bring to this? And I think in some cases that can be a little bit of, tentativeness, because I didn't think Tankman looked good at Bloodsport 3, to be honest with you. I did not I don't even remember who he wrestled on that one, but I remember not being crazy about the match. But whereas this one, I thought everything worked really well.
I think I just want to see more of them.
Yeah, I agree.
A lot of the guys and girls from the third one, but a lot of the guys here, I think I already got more of a sense of character development on the show from a couple of the guys on the show, like Alex Coughlin or Cal Jack or even Super Beast. That was in the next match, actually. Super Beast and Cal Jack. Grizzly Cal Jack.
I love this match.
Yeah.
It's just two big, beefy hosses beating the crap out of each other. First of all, actually, I'll say both these guys, they need to be working. Like, I love seeing them in Bloodsport, but like, I want to see these guys, get a bigger stage. Like, Tony Khan's bringing all these people into AEW Dark. These dudes are sitting there and jump off the screen, and they're good. Like, Super Beast has just this, like the first time I saw him, I'm like, oh, this guy's a gimmick. Because you see the Bane mask and his super jacked up body. And I was like, let's see what this guy does. And then I'm watching him work and I'm like, oh man, this dude knows what he's doing. I put on Twitter last week because I tagged Noah because I'm a big Noah fan. I'm like, this is a guy, Jen, you guys need to book. And then same with Cal Jack. Cal Jack, amateur wrestling guy, Oregon State All-American, legit dude, is out there hitting legitimate gut wrenches, legitimate reverse lifts.
Tall guy.
Yes.
I don't think he has too many people to compare himself to. Maybe Yoshihiro Takayama. That's it.
That's a really good comparison, actually.
They're about the same size, it looks like, right?
Yeah, and Cal Jack's a little bit more of a pleasing American build, a little bit more muscled up than Takayama was, but that's a really good comparison to what he is. Like, that's another one. I'm like, man, why are these guys getting looks? Because these are like monsters, but athletic. And the match was a lot of fun. Like, I like watching two big beefy dudes lifting each other up and dropping each other. Like, there was a lot of like high level Greco freestyle wrestling going on in that match. And neither guy looked like they were a step behind or a step off. Like, this was probably my second favorite match of the show. I loved it.
Yeah, I liked it a lot too. And I liked his match last week, Cal Jax with Edwards. But I could have went for another 5 minutes or so. It was pretty quick, but that's what it was. Like you said, it's just two big heavyweights going at it. With Super Beast is. Do you remember the video game Saturday Night Slam Masters?
Oh yeah,
he seems like a character from out of that.
Absolutely,
he looks
like a video game character completely.
Yeah, and he came out with like the LOD spiky shoulder pads, football shoulder pads, and he was throwing like high kicks, like roundhouse kicks, while Cal Jack wrestled like a wrestler.
Yeah,
big wrestler.
Super Beast, like I said, he reminds me of Bane, like the comic version of what Bane.
The mask looks like it, right?
Yeah, and the big ripped up body. I'm like, these dudes literally jump off the page.
Yeah, that was good. I want to see more of those two for sure. Okay, third, Royce Isaacs defeated Alex Coughlin from New Japan Young Lion. This was a really good match. Royce Isaacs won with a skull end, Sanada's skull end, the Dragon Sleeper. But what did you think of this one?
I liked it. I really like Alex Coughlin from New Japan. He's one of my favorite Young Lion performers that they have. I really enjoy his work on Strong. I think this style fits him perfectly. This was a really well-worked wrestling match. I like the end because, like, I don't know if a Dragon Sleeper I call a legitimate move, but they sold it like it was real.
Right,
like when he, when Isaac's putting in the boots and really like leaning back on it, he made it look legit, right? And I appreciate that. Like, I appreciate
the pro wrestling part,
and I like that. And that's what is cool about this. I said before with you earlier, I'm like, I don't want to watch worked MMA. Like, we had UFC on that. I can watch real MMA, but I like taking the elements from that and mixing them with the familiar pro wrestling just to give us a taste of something different yet familiar. Right. And I think this is a great example of that.
And you kind of, if it's done well, if it's pulled off well, you always think to yourself and you say to your friend, hey, what, man, he really wrenched on that, didn't he? But maybe in fact he didn't. And that's one of the best parts of pro wrestling is that, what did I just see? And if it gets us talking and it gets us to go to the next show, I think it's a job well done on their part.
I appreciated the post match too, where Coughlin gives him a little shove,
Yeah,
because that's real. Like, I yelled at my kids for it. I'm like, hey man, like, it's not sportsmanlike, but I mean, it's real because you don't want to lose. I believe the story of the match was Coughlin was winning and then kind of got caught.
Yep.
Like, it was very, very believable. And what I really like about these matches is they don't, because we're kind of used to like the build in a pro wrestling match, build and a build and a build, and oftentimes the first 15 minutes in a big match are useless because nothing really matters. I love that we don't know when a match is going to end here or how a match is going to end. Like, it keeps me guessing because like any blow can be the last one. Like, when's the last time you see a big main event that lasts like 10 seconds? Like, we don't see that here. We could see it, and I appreciate that.
So it's rewriting the program, the programming of what we think about pro wrestling. So it's forcing us to think a lot. If you want to watch it, and I find that is one of the appealing parts of it. So yeah, I liked also that Royce Isaacs and Alex Coughlin were almost like mirrors of each other.
Yeah.
They're both kind of the same size. It kind of looked like each other. One had like brighter shorts, one had the dark Young Lion shorts. And And I felt like this Coughlin kind of told the same story last week with JR Kratos, where he didn't come up. It's good when this guy loses 2 matches, but we're still talking so highly of him. So it's kind of saying, it's like, okay, he's proving himself in this setting, and he's proving that he's not a chump. And that's what you think when you watch a regular fight too. If a guy just barely uh, his opponent just ekes out a victory, you don't never think poorly on the opponent who lost. You go, oh, that's the game. That's the losing sucks, but that's what it is.
And I think as New Japan fans, you're really educated that with the Young Lions system. This is literally what you expect from the Young Lions. Go out there, they put on a good show. They're not there yet. That's the Young Lions story, and I appreciate that they're continuing it into this GCW show. Like, it's to be honest, a little unexpected, but I appreciate it. I like it.
Well, if you look at the rest of the card, a lot of it makes sense. I mean, we saw about 5, 1, 2, 1, maybe even more, 6 or 7. A lot of the second half of this card was pretty New Japan heavy, actually.
That Forbidden Door is open to GCW too, and people aren't talking about that enough.
Which is a really interesting kind of situation because the nature of it's not really a company. It's just, it's like they're putting on shows. So it seems like there could be a lot of intersection if they. I have no idea what they're planning to do, but it seems like an open space to kind of test things out, or who knows.
It's very much experimental. I think that's the cool part about it, is no one really knows kind of what Bloodsport is quite right yet, but everyone agrees that it's pretty cool.
Right.
It's like I said, it's almost got that early UFC flair to it, where we don't really know what this is, but these matchups are cool, and it's a little dangerous as compared to what we're used to watching. So, I don't know where it evolves either, but I like what I see.
So, and that's kind of where the second half of the card started. We're about 45 minutes in. We talked about earlier, probably the longest match of the card was Rocky Romero from New Japan making his Bloodsport debut, defeating Simon Grimm, MLW's Simon Grimm, in a pretty good match. Would you think about Rocky's debut here, JD?
Rocky's everywhere lately,
right? Yeah, he's a busy guy.
Yeah, he's in MLW. He's doing stuff here. He's at New Japan Strong still. I wouldn't be surprised to see him show up in AEW at some point. Like, I think he's been on Impact too. Like, Rocky's kind of having this super resurgence that people aren't talking about. I really like this match. Like, I'm not a huge Simon Grimm fan traditionally from like his WWE work and stuff I see in MLW from him, but I think he works really well in this, pseudo shoot style, we'll call it. I think it plays well to his strengths. And Rocky was doing a lot of the Rocky Romero stuff, but kind of pulls it back a little bit, where it's not so over the top. Not that he's over the top normally, but in this world, like it's just enough what we know from Rocky Romero to work. It was good. I like it.
He's not bouncing off the ropes or jumping off the ropes because there aren't any ropes. So we saw pretty much how he wrestled without ropes. He wasn't really flying around that much.
They did a really, because I always joke with people, like when they talk about realism wrestling, I always say like the vertical suplex is one of the most unrealistic things in the world. Because why would you let someone put their hand over your head and you're putting your hand over their head? This 50-50, it's not real. They've built that. They did a really good job building to a vertical suplex spot where it evolved into something that looked like it could have actually happened. So that's a spot that I'm super critical of normally, but they built it in a way that was believable, and congrats. I liked it. I liked it a lot.
Yeah, this had the most methodical pace. There was a lot of working around on the mat, a lot of back and forth. Like, Simon Grimm is, to me, more and more becoming like a house name to Bloodsport, because I think he's been on all of them. And I don't think he's picked up a win, or he might have picked up one win, but it's kind of good to have one or two, lifers in a good way, like guys that are always going to kind of represent this brand, whatever it is. And he's working with MLW. It's just, there wasn't anything wrong with the match. It was good. It was good.
No, not at all.
It was just, as the last 3 matches were way more intense. It was what it had to be. Was what it had to be. And it was cool to hear Josh Barnett on commentary talking about how he had trained Rocky at the Santa Monica Inoki Dojo in California, probably 2003. So like 18 years ago.
Yeah.
Long time. So Rocky's been around. But yeah, that was good. And next was Dirty Daddy, Chris Dickinson, eking out the win over the monstrous JR Kratos, another New Japan flavored match. And JD, I wanted to ask you because you just brought it up. You're not a vertical suplex fan, but we saw a pretty mean vertical suplex early on in this.
We did.
And if it were a realistic maneuver, I think it would look pretty similar to what Jared Kratos did because he's actually a big, strong dude that could launch somebody.
Kratos makes it work because he's so much bigger. I mean, Dickinson's a big dude, but Kratos is a goddamn mountain of a man.
Mhm.
So I mean, like it's believable that he is hossy enough to just lift him up. Like when you can sell me on something like that being believable, I'm all good with it. There was a ton of suplex spots, German suplex, what we would call a straight lift in Greco-Roman wrestling. The technique wasn't quite what it should be, but they make it believable. Where especially Chris Dickinson is like struggling to get that big monster up, and I really liked how both guys were working the suplex in this match. There was a lot of ground. There was a lot of like, I don't want to call it ground and pound, but it was kind of like that. A lot of guard style work, where it's basically just Kratos' big ass sitting on him, which is believable. When you've got that
Again,
size mismatch.
It's like older UFC. We saw a lot of the guys like Mark Kerr or Mark Coleman, Kevin Randleman, the wrestlers who that's how they would fight. Once their opponents were on the ground, they just smother them and punch them as hard as they can. And for a while, it was working really well for those guys. It was the style that was dominating the scene, the early MMA scene, probably like late 2000s, or excuse me,
Early
late
90s,
90s,
early 2000s.
yeah, like 99, 2000. That was the kind of style before it developed. I mean, MMA developed so rapidly, and it's where it is now. But yeah, it feels like proto MMA.
Yeah, very much. Very much proto MMA. Like I said, I really enjoyed the big bomb suplexes that they hit with each other. I really like the finish. I think this is Dickinson's first win in Bloodsport.
I think it's his second.
Is it his second? I
Yep.
remember he lost to Moxley and he lost last week.
Wait,
I forget who he lost to.
It could be his. Yeah, I think it's is it his first? We'll have to double check.
Let's double check that. I'm not, but I know that he lost his last two, and like he's got this like, I don't want to come off mean with this, but he's got this like meathead energy to him. Dickinson, like his whole vibe and persona is very jockish, and I appreciate that.
I think he's a self-aware dude. I think he knows what he's doing.
Yeah,
it's just
so
his
too.
Vibe.
Right. And that's a good thing. Like I said, someone like me, I dig that. Like I dig that's a wrestler. Like these are the people I grew up with. So I mean, like I appreciate it. So I mean, like I liked it. I love the story here. Dickinson's a big dude and he was dwarfed out there by Kratos. Like it is good stuff, man.
I liked, and I hope we can see more of those two together in probably New Japan. So
I would like to see them work a traditional New Japan style match to see what that would look like. It got me real interested. Like what they did was perfect for this environment. I would like to see the two of them having a New Japan style match. That excites me.
I imagine we'll probably see it on New Japan Strong sometime, or probably this year. I just they'll cross paths, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, semi-main. Two more New Japan related guys. Jeff Cobb, the wrestler, the Olympian. Jeff Cobb defeated Tom Lawler. Filthy Tom, F4W's own Filthy Tom Lawler, in a really good match with a great finish.
Great finish.
Love that.
This is the cool part about the full Nelson is that it's become such a silly pro wrestling thing over the years. I don't like the fight our Fight Game Media posted is like Billy Jack Haynes out there. The full Nelson is, I love that Josh Briggs, Cobb had to reach back into his amateur background for that. The full Nelson is an illegal move in amateur wrestling. We're not allowed to do it. It's considered dangerous. And like they played into that. Because if you put a full Nelson on a dude for real, he's out. He's done. It's going to hurt far too much, which is why we don't have it legal. It was like, I love the story being like, well, I got to go to this thing that is not legal anywhere else, but I can do it here. And Cobb's a big enough dude to pull that off that that would really, really hurt. And again, this worked. I like what I like the adjustments that Lawler has made since coming over to MMA. Like that dude gets pro wrestling.
I think he's probably the best at whatever they're doing right now. And I'm including people that wrestle in Japan. Like I think he has the best. It's hard to explain, or it's hard to you you have to, I've noticed it because I'm writing about it. So I'm like looking at my writing, I'm like seeing the patterns. It's like, okay, this guy really gets the details, like the important details that only a fighter could know. So, and like tonight, I thought what was great about it was he wrestled or fought Jeff Cobb like he probably would. He wrestled like a guy who has a jiu-jitsu background. That's what a wrestler versus a jiu-jitsu player looks like. It's the jiu-jitsu player trying to pull the wrestler down, pull him into guard, try to sink in a leg lock, sink in an arm lock when the wrestlers are giving their hands as they push and try to slam. And Jeff Cobb did what he did. He slammed him out, and towards the end he tried to do the triple suplex, the triple straight lift succession, and he couldn't land it. So he locked on the coveted, famous, wonderful full Nelson.
Full Nelson. Yeah, it was a great representation, like you just said, of a jiu-jitsu player versus a wrestler. And that's exactly how those things you could see when, like, you'll see it in any dojo in the world where you get a traditional jiu-jitsu guy and a wrestler strolls in, and it would look very similar to that. Maybe not the end, but I mean like the actual fight itself. I like that, man. I do. I think Tom Waller's got a unique understanding of this. I think he'd have been at home in UWFI or something like that, you know.
And it was cool to see Jeff Cobb do what he does, because we see what with recency, we think about Shingo Takagi and we think about his run in G1. So that's pretty spectacular. It's pretty athletic, but he can do a lot too. He can do a lot of stuff without much. He doesn't need the flash. He has a skill. So it was cool to see a little bit of that. It was, again, it wasn't the longest match. So, but that's cool because it gets me to want to watch more of it.
Yeah,
so
I agree.
I hope he does incorporate that more into his wrestling style as he's doing the heel thing in New Japan right now. The full Nelson finish. I think it's time to bring. I can't think of anybody other than the Chris Masters.
Chris Masters thing is the last guy that made that a thing, and I like that.
Master Lock Challenge.
Yeah, I like that because from a standing position, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The full Nelson, right? There's just too much space to move. But sitting in a sitting position, you're in trouble. Like,
and it's also one of those moves. If you've ever rolled with a wrestler. I do jiu-jitsu, and sometimes wrestlers come in and they have grappling experience, but they don't have they don't know exactly what to do in certain positions. And sometimes they freak out and they just grab and squeeze and push or pull. And I have permanent neck damage right here from that.
Because we'll grab the back of the head and we'll pull. It's where we're safe. Like, we don't like being on our back. And because we've been taught since we were a kid that if you're on your back, you have to get to your base, which is, not on your back, you turn over, which exposes you. That's that's the number one thing wrestlers have to worry about when they transition to jiu-jitsu MMA. So there's a lot of truth to that. It's the two sports, and consequently I've had jiu-jitsu kids come into wrestling and they pin themselves sometimes. That's what I did. Because they'll go right to their back and you're like, no, you can't do that.
That's what they did a master's program a couple of years ago, and there was a wrestling club. They don't have a team. They have a wrestling club at Portland State. So I was doing a wrestling club with these younger guys. I'm 36. These guys are probably in the early 20s, big dudes. I was getting my ass kicked, but it was free. So, and I found myself like, why am I in guard right now? I'm on, drill's over. I just screwed myself because it's a different mindset.
Totally different mindset.
But what's cool about this Bloodsport thing is you can kind of what's the word? Dream up what would happen in that situation. But in real life, you would want to avoid it. But here's a setting where you can kind of go, oh, what would happen if a wrestler did this, or I'm a jiu-jitsu guy and I did that, It's kind of like a laboratory.
Yeah, totally. And you can see how these guys are putting these matches together with these jiu-jitsu and wrestling, even like, striking mindsets to employ stuff that we don't see traditionally in pro wrestling. But if you have even a slight grappling background, you can see how these positions evolve, right? And then because you're working it, you could do some cool things that are a little bit unique, much like Jeff Cobb floating into a full Nelson. I didn't see that coming. What a great finish. Never would have called that in a million years.
Because it would work in pro wrestling.
Yes.
Some of the stuff that we dream up, if you tried it in a live spar or in a tournament, you would regret it, I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
It's just that's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but then finally we came. I was enjoying myself. Everything was great. Things were great last week, but boy, oh boy, the main event. Whew, that was it. It delivered.
It's my favorite match of the year so far.
Yeah,
I loved it. Like for me, like I said,
better than anything at Wrestle Kingdom.
yeah,
Better than Shizaki Muto.
yeah, for me, because like my my brain is so permanently wired to amateur wrestling, and I don't get that itch scratched often when I watch pro wrestling. Like
Right.
that's why I like Japanese wrestling, because I'll see them like, oh hey, a real front headlock, or hey, yeah, that's that's why I appreciate Japanese wrestling, because everyone has a wrestling or a judo or a jujitsu background. You can see it when they're doing stuff. You don't see that in America. The vast majority of guys don't have a grappling background of some sort. They just come for the show business of it. For me, this match hit what I love. And I love how John Moxley has evolved himself from being the wacky Dean Ambrose brawler guy to working MMA style stuff, to working amateur, like pulling in from his like amateur background, which you never would have expected based on his old performances. But the man does have amateur background, and you get to see a little bit of that. So for my mindset and what I like from sports in general, this I feel like this match was made for me. I really did. Like it's everything I love about pro wrestling and amateur wrestling and everything just condensed into this sweet little spot. And it might be my favorite thing I've seen from Davey Boy Smith Jr. in a long time, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I don't. He hasn't been active in many promotions over the past. I'm trying to think. Well, I know last spring he was scheduled to be in the
It's
All
gonna go to
Japan
Carnival.
Champion Carnival. That was actually I was really looking forward to that, but
Me too.
that I think that's probably not on the agenda for now. So he's been. I know he's been training, and I know he's been doing stuff like
So
this.
I was at an the MLW pay-per-view last November 2019, and Davey Boy Smith had this match with Timothy Thatcher, and it was in Cicero, Illinois, which is um, it's a very Mexican community. Like, and those people came there, they're lucha fans. They came to that show to see La Parca. And I'm telling you, the entire show, they were chanting for La Parca. And they were not interested in these two guys out here doing the grapple heavy stuff.
Mm.
And they worked really hard to get the crowd interested, but not like super interested in that match. So I kind of can see where the grapple heavy stuff can, turn off some wrestling fans. What I liked about this is that it wasn't just grapple, 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 grapple. Like it got violent and it got nasty. And I'm like, okay, this would work anywhere in the world, any place. So I really appreciated it.
Yeah, if there was a crowd for this main event, I mean, it'd be a completely different. It'd have a different makeup. It'd feel different, but even still, it felt like its own story. It didn't need a crowd. Moxley was great in it. I mean, I feel like we're biased,
We are
but
biased.
Dave Boy Smith is great too. I don't know why we sleep on Davey Boy Smith. He's always been great.
I think, as like I said, I think this is the most fun match I've seen from him in a long time. And I think again, you get two pros top of their game who really want to prove something. And I think these guys were out there trying to prove that this is a viable style of professional wrestling. And I love having the grap. There's a good story. The grappler and the guy who will grapple but will get super super violent,
Mhm.
right? And
Everybody can relate to that.
uh-huh.
Everybody can relate to. I know you're way better than me at this technique, but I don't care.
Mm-hmm.
Let's fight. And it would always kind of not devolve, but Moxley would try. He could play
Yeah.
anybody's game. He'll do the death matches. He'll do Bloodsport, but he just cares about winning in the end. So he'll do whatever it takes. That kind of storytelling, that kind of vibe. And with Davey Boy Smith, who's gigantic now, and he doesn't have to be a heel. He has to be good. And he was booked like an undefeated beast at the main event. And it also kind of makes for a new situation where you don't need baby faces or heels. You have Moxley and Davey Boy Smith, and they can just be themselves, and the match happens as it is.
I love this Moxley character that he's evolved into. It's this very blue collar. I'm going to work really hard on my deficits and make them strengths. But if it's not working, I'm going to get violent. I'm going to rely on my heart, like the fighting
His
spirit,
guts.
his guts. Like there's something super appealing about that. And I called it like this blue collarness to it. And it's very, very appealing. Like he's really developed this everyman persona we never saw present in his WWE character. And it was on display here perfectly because they did portray Davey Boy Smith. He is the student of I think he teaches himself with Barnett, right? Like,
Yep.
isn't that? Yeah,
Yep.
he's Josh Barnett's student.
He's
And
won
like,
some legit catchweight.
yeah,
Or not catchweight. Catch wrestling.
catch wrestling. Yeah,
Catch wrestling's tournaments. Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, like, it was a great story. As Moxley couldn't keep up with him technique wise, so he just had to beat the shit out of him.
Yeah.
Like that's like out of a movie. It's fantastic. And it had the blood, it had the emotions, and
a lot of blood.
Like I remember I messaged you. I'm like, did he blade? Did I miss that? Because I just wasn't expecting. And it's funny in an event called Bloodsport, we don't really see a ton of blood. No. Great title, but it made sense. It was perfect. And like Moxley, there's no one better at capturing an emotion in a wrestling match right now in the world. Like I put him in like go as far as like dudes that can really capture an emotion. Though they're like the top two for me. And he nailed it tonight. It was just awesome. And Davey Boy Smith was with him there beat for beat. And they're just beating the shit out of each other. And it was phenomenal. I adored this match.
And it had a slight build, but it was all logical. It felt like what's going to happen next? What's going to happen? Davey Boy Smith has to win, can't he? He's just destroying Moxley, but Moxley would always come back with something. It was a simple, great, even fundamental pro wrestling story.
100%. The core of pro wrestling, where you have the babyface has, even though like you said, Davey Boy Smith isn't a true heel by the senses we think of him. Moxley's definitely playing that underdog role, where like you want, like, again, I don't think there's anyone better at being a babyface and capturing a crowd or a fan's interest right now and wanting them to rally. You wanted Moxley to rally the whole time, and it worked, and it didn't have to play into theatrics. It felt like this match felt like I was watching a pro wrestling match. It really did. But it also had that element of sport to it, which is what I think that we need to kind of refine in wrestling. Like, I think we've gone way too far in the theater direction and could swing back. Like, we've done the irony stuff, the comedy stuff for so long. I would like to see us swing back a little bit the other direction, where stuff is played a little bit more for sport as opposed to, for entertainment.
I think that's what they're trying to figure out with this Bloodsport deal. The finish was paradigm shift, double arm BDT, a very pro wrestling finish. I get it. It really protects his move. It kind of it makes that move in his context when he goes to New Japan, when he goes to AEW, makes that more or come off as more effective. Although, to be honest, I'd have rather seen if you're going to do the pro wrestling stuff, powerbomb and suplexes, that's cool. Whatever, DDT, okay.
I get you. I get where you're coming from.
I get it. But again, like a lot of these opinions that I'm spouting off, it's like they've only done 5 events, and the past 2 were like the ones that were like this. So I can't pass judgment and hold it like that. I'm really eager to see more of it.
I thought they would, because Moxley's been getting that bulldog choke over.
Right. Yeah.
I thought that would have been the finish, and I like being surprised. Here's what I did like, because he didn't pin him. There are no pins in Bloodsport. There could be, but they're not. I think there's things we need to implement from Bloodsport and take into pro wrestling. The referee stoppage needs to be more of a thing in pro wrestling. Right? The knockout needs to be more of a thing. Like, we look for these. I hate protected finishes, but this is a great use of protected finish. Like, he knocked him unconscious.
Yeah, that's the only way, and that's a good way for Davey Boy Smith to not lose much of his heat. Because when you get knocked out, you're just knocked out. I mean, look, Conor McGregor, he got knocked out cold in the second round of his big comeback. And you know what? People are still talking about him more than Dustin Poirier, like it or not. Dustin Poirier, because Dustin Poirier is a babyface. I get it. He's the better fighter. He knocked him ass, but it's just what it is. So having those kind of finishes and doing that sort of thing, I think it's important. Yeah, like you're saying.
I think there's a lot we can import. Like, do you think, I was wondering this, do you think we could run these matches in a ring as traditional pro wrestling, bring back the pinfall? Could this work if you just like, if say AEW just ran their show, didn't say nothing, and ran their show normally, but the matches played off like more like this? Do you think the audience would even recognize it? Do you think it would get over? Do you think it would work? Because I think it could.
It could, but I don't think it would.
You
I
don't think
think
so?
no, I think on a mainstream level, that mainstream audience needs to be, they need a certain literacy. They need a certain
Yeah, you're probably right.
MMA grappling literacy. And it's way better and it's way more feasible in 2021 than it was in say like 2005, because since then most people most people have seen UFC. They don't know what it is, maybe, but everyone has kind of seen like, oh, they're in a cage and they're fighting. Okay, that's what fighting is. So they're okay. If I'm a 21-year-old fan, and that means that what 2000, born in 2000, like
Yeah.
I remember when UFC started. Like I
Me too.
remember it wasn't like they didn't put on a lot of events, and they just did those infomercials, a lot of the pay-per-view ones. Like so what I'm saying about like this hypothetical 21-year-old fan is that they've lived their entire life now with UFC not only being a thing but being an established thing. It wasn't huge, but so it's like there's an embedded literacy in younger fans. It's going to be, at least.
All of my kids know MMA. Every single one of my kids that come into wrestling watch and follow MMA. They talk about it. They love it. Like, and it's been like that for at least a decade, if not a decade and a half.
Do you think MMA or UFC really kind of helped interest younger
Into wrestling? Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
guys
MMA,
like Matt Hughes
yeah.
and
Yeah, Matt Hughes, especially where I live in Illinois, there was a period where we were getting a lot of kids who wanted to wrestle because of Matt Hughes. Yeah, no, it's big. Like the rise of UFC has helped a dying sport, because for a long time our sport looked like it was on the way down. And then Ronda Rousey, to another fact too, her rise in women's MMA has bolstered women wrestling. It's to the point where women's wrestling is the fastest growing sport in the country. Wow. To where they're adding women's Division I wrestling programs. Like, over the last decade, the rapid exponential growth of women's wrestling is, and I'm going to put it right on one. There's a lot of people fighting for it, but Ronda Rousey specifically, she was like that champion of who really pushed women's combat sports into the mainstream. And that was the difference maker. UFC has been a huge bolster for my sport.
You know, it's funny that you mentioned Ronda Rousey, because when you think about it, I just like spend like 30 seconds thinking it through. It's like she would be like the absolute perfect person for Bloodsport.
Oh yeah,
with her background and like a Jean LaBelle guru, or excuse me, disciple. Yeah, like there's a lot you could do. And
I do think this is something that, because MMA is so popular, and because this, and again, I was worried this would just be worked MMA and there's no point in worked MMA, but there's enough pro wrestling stuff to add to this where I think this could be a good direction for wrestling. I really do. Not abandoning everything that people are doing now, but there's no reason this stuff could not be incorporated on a mainstream level. Like I'm talking about the way they're working matches. Like, audiences are educated enough to understand stuff, because you see guys put MMA stuff into pro wrestling all the time.
Saw it last week, NXT.
Yeah.
Pete Dunne and Finn Balor. Did you get a chance to watch that one?
I have not, but I heard.
Well, it's good. It's as you'd expect, but I remember watching Pete Dunne. He had Finn Balor up on the ropes, and he was giving him those Conor McGregor shoulder butts. Did you ever see when Conor McGregor likes to get the guy up in the clinch, and he kind of gets close to him, and he really
pop the shoulder. Yeah.
Yeah. He was doing a worked version of that. So it's there.
Like, the guys are working this stuff and have been for a while. Cause like Roman Reigns in that Kevin Owens match, he was doing a guillotine choke, right? Like that's MMA. I think that if we incorporated more kind of like the sensibilities on top of just the moves, I think that could, and again, maybe I'm in love with what I love, but I think that could really do something, you know, and like you were saying, not abandon the notion of faces and heels, but downplay them a little bit and not having to have everybody a clean black, clean white, but just like having personalities really showcase, which is what I liked about this. And I think they need more of that. There's places I think that Bloodsport can improve, but I think that the booking ideas of not necessarily having to rely on good versus evil don't necessarily have to be what's being done in wrestling.
So I guess we'll just have to keep watching, and
Yeah.
we'll have to wait. Well, we'll wait till April, because after the show, they announced that Josh Barnett's voiceover was on the screen, and he said John Moxley likes to go all over the world to look for fights. Now he's going to bring him a fight on April 8th. Bloodsport 6, Josh Barnett versus John Moxley. Finally, this was supposed to happen last year, but no, 2 years ago, because
no,
2019.
Yeah, 2020.
Oh, 2020. Okay, it was when
Yeah.
he had to cancel something because he had John Moxley had MRSA on his arm. Was that it?
It was 20. It was. I forget. No,
Well,
you're right. It was the MRSA. It was fall of 2019. That's what it was.
okay, so but almost like a year and a half ago, this was supposed to happen. Oh, and Chris Dickinson he replaced him with Chris Dickinson, right?
I think
Was that
so.
it? Okay,
So.
well, have to do some double checking, but yeah, this was supposed to happen a while ago. It's finally happening, which means it'll be another show. So maybe we can do this again. But
I love this. I'd love to see more of it. I'd like to see them play into people's personalities more. I'd like to see more interviews. I'd like to hear the guys talk a little bit more. I think you're right. They need a more of a traditional hard camera
or something steady.
Yeah,
something steady, and it's quite smoky and it's cool, but it's also, I don't really think they need that. I mean,
that's a lighting. They're doing that to diffuse some lighting.
Right.
So that's a production technique, and I get why they're doing it. It's literally so the lights cut a little, so the cuts on. Like I mean, like I get where they're going. They're going for that raw, gritty thing. But I think if you presented it like more traditional pro wrestling, it would still work.
I think the main thing, we can finish on this point. Yeah. The main thing that I feel like they might have to keep in mind is that. So I've been studying a lot of Keiji Muto this week because I did a show for me site that we talked about Keiji Muto a lot, and especially during the UWFI New Japan UWFI battle feud that we've talked about on High Tension, kind of 95, 96. It was a kind of a battle of philosophies, right? Mm-hmm. And one thing that stuck out to me that Keiji Muto said was that he didn't want to wrestle in that way, that UWF way, catch wrestling way, because he didn't want to use techniques that would ignore the fans. He didn't want to use techniques that would ignore the fans. He always avoided that too real aspect to, whatever that means, too real for, so take somebody like Tiger Mask Sayama. If you look at Tiger Mask, look at how he wrestled, the UWF and UWFI crew took a lot of what Sayama did, but Muto took the flashy stuff that Sayama did, the handsprings and the planchas, the moonsault, because everybody can see those. That's the spectacle. So it's kind of comes down to philosophy. How much performance do you want in your wrestling? I guess.
And they did, when we covered that on High Tension, like that specific with Muto and Takada, the figure four and what that really meant. And the crowd was, again, we're not this educated, but the Japanese crowd got what they were going for. And Muto winning with the figure four.
I learned something specific about that, actually.
Really? I can't wait to listen to this show because I love you and Fumi. What did you pick up?
That was important. So we're talking about October 1995, Tokyo Dome, sold out. Keiji Muto versus Nobuki Takada, UWF5 versus New Japan, title on the line. Yeah. He felt that, he couldn't, he was afraid he wouldn't be able to put Takada away, but he knew that Takada liked to use a lot of kicks, so that he decided his strategy would be to catch him on one of his kicks eventually, and finally really use the dragon screw leg whip that Tatsumi Fujinami used on him years back. The dragon screw leg whip would go right into the very pro wrestling figure four leg lock. That was the whole plan. And my addition to this thought is that if you're thinking of like a more Zen or old samurai like way of thinking, it's that sort of thinking of attack or stab with no sword. If you're in a sword fight, attack with no sword, meaning use whatever that you don't have against your opponent. Use what your opponent has to beat them. And what he did was he used Takada's offense, the real kicks, the real striking, and he used a very pro wrestling counter. And of course, it could only work in this setting because it's pro wrestling. You can tell a story like that. And everybody remembers, oh, that's when he used the dragon screw leg whip. It was effective. It's what won him that huge match. And it became a part of his arsenal.
And I think there's a lot of parallels to that tonight with Moxley winning with the DDT.
Sure.
In this, because it was straight up. Because I remember when at Bloodsport 3, when it blew my mind that Davey Boy Smith won with a Tiger Bomb. Like that's not what I expected. But that kind of opened my mind up to what this could really be. And then Moxley tonight wins with a double arm DDT, like the more unrealistic version of the DDT. But it's perfect for what we're doing here, which I do see a lot of similarities between New Japan, UWFI.
There are a lot of different ways you could go, but we'll see where they're at. So I guess that's it for now. We're going to wrap it up, but this is new. Garrett, our host that we had a show with last week, him and I covered Bloodsport. He's doing an interview with Dave Meltzer right now on the Observer site. They can check out. I'm sure that it's up right now after I posted this, but JD and I are going to be back on next week on the Patreon network on Fight Game Media with High Tension. And that's our Japanese pro wrestling show that we talked about earlier. We'll probably talk about Keiji Muto a little bit again and some other good stuff. News, some news, some older stuff. But if that's your gig, and if you're listening to this and you've made it all the way to the end of a Bloodsport review, I highly recommend you check out High Tension, because I have a feeling that you like that too.
Yeah, you're gonna be right up our alley. We'll put it that way.
Okay, so let's wrap it up. That was Bloodsport 5. Maybe do this again for Bloodsport 6. Probably talking about this next week too. So, all right, for JD, I'm Justin. We'll see you guys later.